The culture of war has changed starkly, especially when it comes to media reportage. Let us x-ray that matter today. Let us start this way. Before this modern wars, Al-Aqsa flood to the, uh, Palestinian resistance back then in 2003. Before then, the Russia versus Ukraine war that launched in February 2022, and then into Lebanon, into Iran, into Syria, and other modern military conflicts. Before then, we had Iraq, lasted for close to 20 years. We had Afghanistan, lasted for close to 20 years, and other wars. Let us draw a line between Russia and what? And then Iran, and then Afghanistan, Iraq upwards. You see, for Afghanistan, Iraq upwards, social media was not really a thing. What was a thing then was our TV. And when you talk of TV, it was essentially, at least to the global south, to this part of the world, West Africa, Africa, and some other, not very rich parts of the world. Essentially, all of the media we got, all of the reportage we got about most of the Iraq war and the Afghan war was from two major media, CNN and BBC. You see, they will not just report, what the Americans and their allies, NATO and all that joined them in those wars were saying. We also depended on them to report about the adversaries, of the Americans and the NATO guys. In this case, the Afghans and the Iraqis for each of the wars. So they were reporting. We depended on them essentially for the entire global reportage of those conflicts, both from the allies and from the adversaries. Imagine if it is your enemy that is reporting your matter. Under normal circumstances, as expected, it will be skewed against you, right? We had no choice. We had to depend on, mainstream, staple Western media to report not just from their own perspectives, but from the perspectives of their adversaries. We were stuck with them. There was no option. We depended on them and them only to report from both sides. In fact, most of the soldiers, as most of the journalists, of the CNN and the BBC journalists, were actually embedded within the ranks of the American and NATO military. They rode on their tanks, they flew on the military planes, they were housed a lot of times in and around the military bases and stuff like that. That was the scenario. Okay, about the major dissenting voice was Al Jazeera Qatar. But Al Jazeera was actually limited in its ability to actually report the war. In fact, when there was conflict, Al Jazeera was actually attacked, even militarily. In Iraq, for example, the Al Jazeera bureau office somewhere in Iraq, I think Baghdad, was actually attacked. The generator was blown off, and two journalists, were unalived in that incident by the American allied NATO forces. That was them. By 2022, when the Russia versus Ukraine war started downwards, there has now been a complete difference in the media ecosystem. One, mainstream media is also there. There was still CNN, there was still BBC, there is still New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CBS, ABC, the Economist of the UK, the Daily, the Telegraph of the UK, Bild of Germany, all those Western media you all know, they are still there. However, the influence in being able to shape the reportage, in being able to set the agenda, in being able to decide as to what is reported or not, in being able to essentially culture the ecosystem of the media as they so wish, and essentially flank it as they so decide, has been whittled down massively. What whittles that influence down massively is a social media. We're talking of the Facebooks of this world. We are talking of the Twitters, now X's of this world. We are talking of TikTok that the Chinese gave to the world, but has now been taken up. But you can call it a hostile purchase by the Americans, the Larry Ellisons of this world. And very importantly, we will get back to that, the telegrams of this world that was built by a Russian who actually is domiciled by far more in the UAE. Now, social media essentially took the sail out of the hands of legacy media. And legacy media is now complaining badly. They complain so much that one of the editors of this legacy media at one of the recent World Economic Forum meetings in Davos in Switzerland actually complained that back then we were the ones who used to decide what was the news. It is whatever we call news that is news. Whatever we don't report, it's not just that we don't report it, it's that it did not happen at all. Do you understand that kind of power? Such that you don't just get to decide what people choose as to what they consume or not. You also get to choose what news you will mask entirely under information, not just disinformation or misinformation. It is actually under information or even zero information. Mask it out of complete existence. That was how much power the legacy media had. But with the advent of social media, we are now starting to find sometimes even untrained media entities completely. We call it user-generated content in media studies. Completely untrained folks who will go on social media, open a Facebook account, open an X account, open an account on TikTok, on Telegram, and harness hundreds of thousands, even millions of followers. More than this legacy media can possibly harness, on this same social media. Put out content, true or false, verified or not, approved or not, governmentally supported or not, and people follow them in their droves against what the legacy media is saying. That is what social media has brought to us. Now, the legacy media now have massive competition, and it's not business as usual anymore. Again, to further control the media reportage, the media ecosystem, the governments of these Western countries, led by the US, now started to control and throttle even this social media. You now have people's entire Facebook pages yanked off Facebook and X. You have people, whose followerships have been throttled. You follow someone and you suddenly discover that you have unfollowed the person without you actually unfollowing the person. You see videos and pictures being taken out, being blurred, being removed, entire posts yanked off. You see people being warned. You see people being, essentially pushed out as much as possible from social media because they are reporting against the editorial policy of this government-backed, government-supported Western MSM mainstream media. Now, we are also now starting to have situations at the apogee where social media like TikTok are actually essentially financially taking over from countries that have editorial and as such foreign policies that tend to be in the direction of some other countries as against some other countries. For example, China. When America tried as much as possible to censor TikTok and they couldn't, what did they do? They bought it over under pressure from the Trump government. And China essentially sold the American business of TikTok to the Americans. You will call it back to sender. Again, you will continue to see that struggle. You will continue to see that scuffle. And where we are now, largely, is a Telegram. Telegram, about at this material time, is the most free, so to say, of the highly contested social media. Everybody is fighting. All those governments are fighting for the soul of this social media. Again, like I said, the war has moved to social media away from legacy. In fact, legacy media actually now take news from social media to report. And what has fouled the whole thing now, especially in the context of this Iran versus America war, is fake news. Fake news, in fact, is the reason why you are all listening to me. You want to sift the truth from falsehood. What exactly is happening? What exactly is the truth of what several entities are saying, governmental and otherwise? Sometimes you are so confused, you don't even know which is which. And that is what we are going to be discussing in the next video. How to meander through this avalanche, of fake news, especially as regards this war. How I personally meander through that avalanche of fake news. And why exactly fake news has now become, a hydra-headed problem, especially when it comes to war reportage in the context of this Iran versus America war. I hope and pray and believe that you will join me in the next video to x-ray this important matter. Thank you very much. See you.